So hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Starting Your Home Garden. My name is Lynn Mattis and I work in the Alumni Relations Office here at Mohawk College. I'm so glad you're able to join us today and look forward to learning alongside all of you. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's webinar guest. Ashley Packer is a 2016 graduate of the Architecture Technology program at Mohawk College. Now a team member of the Mohawk College Sustainability Office, she works with students, staff, and community members as the Sustainable Food Systems Coordinator, helping to connect Mohawk's communities to local food systems while demonstrating the importance of healthy and sustainable lifestyles. Thank you so much for being here today, Ashley. As someone who personally has been successful and unsuccessful in growing outdoor plants, I'm really excited to hear your presentation on some best practices. So with that, I will hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. So perfect, hello and welcome and nice to meet everybody. I'm really excited for today's presentation. I think we're gonna learn a lot. So before getting started, I just wanted to kind of give you guys an overview of, I guess, who I am and what I do on campus. So Lynn, thank you so much for the introduction. And yes, I am the Sustainable Food Systems Coordinator at Mohawk College with the Sustainability Office. And so I kind of just want to go over what that even means and what I do on campus so that you guys get some context. So the Office of Sustainability is where I work, and our office manages over 30 campus programs each year. And these programs, so these programs aim to kind of educate students and staff as well as implement sustainable solutions. And then we also want to be integrating sustainability as part of Mohawk's culture. And so that's kind of our goals overall as an office. Currently, we are 1 manager and 3 coordinators. And then each year we also hire students, I guess, like each semester as well. And that's looking a little bit different this year because everything is virtual, but we still try to have those learning pieces in our office so that students can kind of get an idea of sustainability and get that experience. So in my role, one of the main things that I do on campus is I manage our campus community garden. And so each year it is about 300 or more staff, students, and community members. We have 50 plots on campus. And we actually started in 2013, but we started in 2015 donating any excess food to our local food banks. And so since 2015, we've donated just over 1,200 pounds of produce. Most of it has gone to our neighbor-to-neighbor local food bank, but we've also supplied some to the MSA food bank as well, so that students can access that fresh and healthy food. And I guess this, well, it's not this year anymore, it's last year, 2020, because of the effects of COVID, we had to kind of have our garden and our community garden look a little bit different. And so what we ended up doing was turning the space into more of like a victory garden style garden. So we were growing food specifically for our local food banks. We weren't able to have people come in and grow their own food. And so we wanted to still use the space to do good for our community. And grow food for it as well. On campus, I also manage our farm stand. And so this is something where it's a partnership with a company called 100 Kilometer Foods. And the goal is to bring in fresh and local produce to campus and make it more accessible for staff and students. Since starting, we have sold over 1,500 pounds of fresh local food. And this year, because we weren't able to open the farm stand on campus, what we did was partnered with Dundurn Market, which is a local food grocery store, to just give free local food boxes to any MSA food bank users. And so I started that in January, and we've been able to help over 140 of the food bank users so far, and I'm continuing until I think May this year. So I'm very excited about that, to be able to, one, get the word out about local food, but then also, especially during this time, help those that need it. And just another last point here of a couple things that I do on campus. We have pollinator gardens as well as honeybees on campus. So our biggest and most beautiful garden that we have is our rooftop pollinator garden, and that's actually above the library on campus. And then we also work with our grounds team to implement sustainable landscaping solutions, things like rain gardens, bioswales. We also have a fruit orchard on campus with 36 apple and pear trees. And then for the honeybees, that's a partnership with Humblebee. And we have 6 beehives on campus that we harvest our own honey from. And that I hope to one day sell at our farm stand as well, or like give away maybe, because we're just growing it for fun. So, but all of these projects are something that we intend to just, you know, be able to support our pollinators and then just show the importance of them as well. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of a little bit of the mishmash of projects that I do on campus. So now that you know who I am and what I do, we can kind of get into the topic at hand, which is gardening at home. So the first thing I want to talk about just before kind of getting into the actual information is just what are the benefits to growing your own garden and why you should do it. So the benefits include a couple different things. Again, before getting into the nitty gritty, I just wanted to highlight some of these benefits for us because gardening and taking care of plants does have a couple nice side effects on both your mental and physical health. It can help you reduce stress by giving you something to do. And that's something where you can kind of just turn your brain off and relax, and it helps you, just kind of reduce stress in that way so that you're not necessarily thinking about your stresses and more so just taking care of something. And it can also boost your self-confidence. And this is something that once you start growing your plants and once you start, you know, being successful at it and you're like, oh, like this is a lot of fun and you feel good, you're taking care of something. It really boosts your self-confidence and it keeps you, you know, taking care of something. Gardening also gets you out in the sun, which is a big one. This is something that's going to get you that vitamin D that we all need and end up making you feel better because of it. It also encourages mindfulness in the garden. And this is one that when I started gardening, I really benefited from this one. And it's just, you know, slowing down, keeping an eye on your garden and just having to kind of pay attention to both your actions and your movements in your garden and when you're working with your plants. And just, having that slow time so that you're not hurting your plants and kind of just keeping yourself a little bit more mindful of your actions, which I love that. It's something I really, really enjoyed from it. And then all of this combined makes you happier. So these are just some things that I love about gardening. And then some benefits, if you want to grow a vegetable garden specifically, there's even more benefits. And this is just something that, you know, once you start growing your food and seeing kind of what goes into it, you start to get an appreciation and an idea of where your food comes from and what it takes to actually get to you. So the same as whatever actions you're taking to kind of take care of these plants and these vegetables, you can kind of think on a larger scale what a farmer might be doing to be taking care of the vegetables that you end up eating. Growing your own vegetables will also promote eating healthier. And that's just because obviously we put so much work into these vegetables and then we want to, you know, actually enjoy them and actually eat them. And you get an appreciation for, you know, that better tasting food that you've put a lot of work into. And then it can also save you money. And this is one that I didn't even realize when I first started because I was just super into gardening. I was like, like whatever. But it ends up actually saving you money over time. And that's especially if you start plants from seed. A seed pack costs like $2. And if you get like however many tomatoes out of it, it ends up in the long run saving a lot of money. And then that last point there is just, again, making you appreciate, you know, how much goes into these foods that you end up eating. And then once you actually get to taste them, how much better they taste than just grocery store produce. It's something that side by side, you know, it's not comparable. It's just so much better from the garden. So now that we've kind of gone over the benefits a little bit here, I kind kind of wanted to just talk about starting seeds indoors. And I know that this can kind of feel like an overwhelming topic. So I kind of wanted to break it down like step by step, and then also get into kind of like the how-to as we kind of go along the way. So just highlighting some of the things that seeds actually need when you're starting them. The first one here is warmth. So when you first start your seeds and you put them in the soil, it's less about light and it's actually more about the warmth of the seed. That's what's actually going to make them sprout. So when you start seeds indoors, you want to think about where you're putting them to actually start them. And it doesn't really matter where, as long as that place is warm. So a couple places that are good examples of this is in front of some windows, and that could either be a south facing window or even a east or west facing window. If it gets quite a bit of light, that is what you're going to need to be able to start your seeds. And then some other warm places, and these are places that I actually start mine as well, is on top of a radiator. I have rads throughout my house, and they stay warm up until like mid-spring. And so it's a place where that's where I start my seeds. And then also on top of your fridge is another place, because it's running all day. It keeps warm up there. So you can actually put your seedlings up, or your seeds up there as well. And then if you don't have any of these options, say you have like a north facing window, no rads, and nowhere warm to really set them, you can also totally buy, they're called seed tray warmers. They're not that cheap. I think they're probably, they're not that expensive. I think they're probably like 15 bucks for one that would hold like at least one tray. So that's an option. And I did link an option there as well on, I think it was on Amazon, if you want to buy some, just so if you wanted to, you totally could, but it's not necessary. Just anywhere warm in front of a window, whether it's on a rad or not. Yeah. So to start your seeds, you're also going to need some containers. And so for this, there are options that you can purchase, but there's also options that you can just kind of collect from even your recycling bin. So one of the things that you want to keep in mind is that the trays are going to need to be 1 to 2 inches deep to start. And they're also going to need to have good drainage. And so there are, seed trays and cells that you can purchase, but you can also totally use egg cartons are a really good option, and berry containers are a really good option because both will have good drainage. And then as the plant kind of gets bigger, you can then use something that's a little bit more deep, 4 to 5 inches. And that's either plant pots, which if you're any sort of gardener, you might know that those kind of just collect around. So you can always save those to plant in. And then you can also use yogurt containers, just making sure that you're poking holes at the bottom of them. So another thing that you're going to need to be able to start your seeds is good soil for it. And so seedlings especially, they need a light and a fluffy soil. And that's just so that they can hold a lot of water. And so the best option here is pretty much any potting soil. Most potting soils will say on it plugs and germination, or they'll say like 4 seedlings. And so that's a really good option to start, and that's nice and light. And then you're also going to need a fertilizer or a food for them to start as well. And that's just as the plant grows, it does need quite a bit of food to start. And, typically like in the ground, we'll have that kind of food for them, so they'll be fine. But when you're starting them indoors, potting soil doesn't have enough food for them. So they need a little bit of fertilizer to be nice and healthy so that they'll grow big and strong for you. And so the one that I suggest using is a 4-6-4 fertilizer. And I always go organic, and that's just a personal choice. I think it's the best. And so I think, oh yeah, I totally did. I linked to a fertilizer that you can use. There's a local place here in Hamilton that sells it, but you can also find it online, and there's a ton of other places that sell it, as long as it says that 4-6-4, which is your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. as long as it has that ratio, then you're good to go. And when mixing your soil for starting your seeds, you want to mix about half soil and half fertilizer in it. So half and half, mix it up nice, and then that's what you're going to be starting your seeds in. Perfect. So planting your seeds, this is what I think is the easiest part because every seed packet will tell you on the back of it exactly how to plant it. And so the standard is typically about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. But again, the seed packet will tell you otherwise what it is. And then for each cell, like each section, so even if it was on the egg carton, just each wherever the egg goes, I plant about 1 to 2 seeds per section, just to make sure that they actually grow, and then you just cover them lightly and they're good to go. Alrighty, and then one of the last things that you're going to need to do as well is making sure that you water them well. So once they're in your window or on your rad, wherever they're growing, it's important to make sure that they stay watered. This is one of the biggest things that kills seedlings, if they do not get enough water. And so I suggest using a spray mister, and that's just because 1, it won't disturb the seed when it is a seed, and then 2, it won't disturb like a baby plant. It won't uproot it or anything like that. It's pretty gentle on them. So you can just use a spray mister and water it every single day, making sure that it doesn't dry out. And then obviously once the plant gets bigger, it'll kind of start to tell you, like it'll droop down a little bit or pick up a little bit when you are watering it well. But I suggest still every day, I always check up on them. And then if you don't have a spray mister or don't want to use a spray mister, you can also put a tray on the bottom of whatever container you're using and pour water into that tray, and they'll actually soak it up from the bottom as well. That is an option as well. And that I think is a good option, especially if you're worried about having water like spill over it all or like go through your little potting like containers. Just making sure you don't get water everywhere, especially if you start it on a rad or like near a wall or something. It's always good to be cautious of that. And then another tip as well for starting seeds and making sure that they're kind of holding that moisture and keeping wet enough is to put a clear lid on them. This is something that I do to make sure that it traps that moisture, and I just find that it also keeps in heat, which is really nice. I'll put a clear lid. You can purchase clear lids, but you can also, again, using a berry container or even like a salad mix container, you could always put that over top of your seedlings, that kind of thing. Perfect. And the last tip here is about light. And we'll get into kind of a little bit more about light because there's either growing without lights or with lights. So we can talk about that. But as soon as your seeds sprout, so you've now been watering them for a week every day, keeping them warm, and they should sprout within 8 to 10 days. And they do need quite a bit of light. And so I've written here, they need 14 to 16 hours of light a day. But they also, very importantly, need darkness. So they kind of go through the same cycle that we do, where we need light and then we need sleep. And so for them, they need the light, and then they also need that 8 to 10 hours of darkness or a rest from the light, or else, you know, they might burn out or whatever it is. So it's important they get that 14 to 16 hours of light, and then they get 8 to 10 hours of rest. So now, when you start your seeds, there's a couple different ways you can start them, either with lights or without lights. And so you actually, I have grown them both ways. So it'll be successful whichever way you choose to do it. It's just about preference, and then about, you know, how much you're willing to kind of put into it as well. But to start, you definitely don't need lights if you don't want them, or if you even don't have room for them. You can get enough light from your windows. The best windows are south-facing windows, which is what I actually have those in my bedroom. And so that's where I start my seeds and my seedlings is in my bedroom, because it gets that south, like pretty much sun all day, which is really nice. And if you don't have a south-facing window, east and west are the second best after that. So there's a couple different options here. You can either just keep them in the east or a west window, or what a lot of people do as well is they will carry their plants. So east window in the morning, and then they'll carry them over to a table at the other side of the house on the west facing side for the afternoon. Just making sure again that they're getting that full day of sun, so that they're not going to get like leggy and weak. And then to avoid having them get leggy, I would just rotate them daily. So on the spot, I don't know how to show this. I have a spray bottle here. I'm going to show you with it. So I would just have them facing the window the one day, and then the next day I would just flip them so that they're not going to grow too much one way. And that'll stop them from getting leggy or stop them from kind of bending over and flopping over. That's definitely a really good option to do that. And I do it, the same time that I'm watering, I also will just flip them so that it's just all done in one go. Now, if you're going to grow your seedlings with lights, it's important that you're getting the correct bulbs for your lights. Of course, there are grow lights, which I think they're like a purpley kind of light that you can just buy. Anything named plant grow light will work for you. But incandescent or like your regular bulbs are not good. They're too hot. They're going to burn your plants. And then what you do want are, I've added some pictures here at the side of them. They're these like that cool white fluorescent light. And those actually put off the same light as like grow lights. So that's a good option as well for your seedlings. And again, remembering that they need that 14 to 16 hours of light. And so a really easy way to do that is just buying a light timer so that you can put it on for that 16-hour period if you want to. And you don't even have to be awake yet. It'll just turn on itself, which is really nice. It just makes the process a little bit easier. And then the last slide here on just using grow lights. So when you start with your lights, again, you're going to want to start as soon as they sprout. And you want to start having them right above your container's lid, or if you don't have a lid, right above your plants, about 2 to 3 inches away from them. And then as the plants grow, you keep that 2 to 3 inch distance away from them. You never want your lights to be touching your plants, or else they will burn the plant. So you do have to be careful with them. And again, not keeping them on 24/7, making sure that they get that 8 hours of rest. And then, yeah, keeping them 2 to 3 inches away from your little plants. So I figured I would give some information on where we are now in the season and what you could start now, because we're 1 week into April. So the gardening season is coming up pretty fast. So we want to make sure that we're doing what we can, starting what we can in April. So when to start your seeds, each type of plant has a different starting date. And it also depends on your area. And so it's a lot of information all at once. And it's not something that you have to know off the bat, or you ever have to know. Because there's so many resources out there that'll help you when planning out your garden and when planning out when to start your seeds. And a really great resource that I like, I've linked it here. It's the Farmer's Almanac website. And they essentially just made a calendar where you can type in your area code and then, or your postal code, sorry, and then it'll tell you when to plant what seed, which is really nice. And it tells you both when to put it outdoors and when to start it indoors. And so again, I've linked it there so that you can see. And then as you look here, you can kind of see there's a bunch of different options there, and it'll tell you, okay, if you want to start that seed indoors, you would start it. These ones are in March, these ones are in April, these ones are in February. Some of them need a lot of time to grow. But then if you wanted to plant your seedlings outdoors, just as seedlings, when to actually bring them outdoors. Yeah, so it's a really good resource. And I really like this one because it's also very accurate and it gives you 2 options. So there's an option based on your frost date, which is the little snowflake here. And then there's also one based on moon dates, and the frost date and the moon dates are just dates that are kind of two different theories of when to start seeds. And so you can kind of pick whichever one to go with. They're usually very, very similar and a lot of times overlap. So yeah, it's a good reference though. So in April, for Hamilton at least, you can start seeds indoors right now if you wanted to. You could still start lettuce, cucumbers, melons, Swiss chard, and zucchini. And then you can also, come mid-April, it'll be warm enough that you can actually direct sow into the ground outside if you wanted to, because some of these are cool weather crops that will still grow even if the weather is very cold. We might even get a frost, but these guys will be fine. You could plant outside lettuce, beets, carrots, peas, parsnips, and turnips there. So there's some really great options to get started. I know it's still cold out some days, but you can get started and get gardening as soon as you want. So I figured I would go over a little bit about just how you can start a garden outdoors, and then in a little bit we'll talk about balcony gardening as well. So for outdoor or backyard gardening, there's a couple of different options that we can go through, and I'll talk about each one as well. But if you do have a backyard to work with, putting in a veggie garden is so easy and it's so much fun as well. And I do love that planning phase of it. It's a lot of fun to kind of have that creative moment with your garden. And so some tips that I have for that and getting started is to just watch your yard for maybe a week or so and just see where the sun hits the most. And that's the spot that you're gonna wanna build your garden or start planting your garden. And then I would also suggest starting small, because you can always go bigger once you kind of get the hang of things, but you don't want to overwhelm yourself, and you don't want to accidentally dig up too much and then you're like, oh shoot, I should actually like change the location or do whatever it is, right? So I would always start small and then kind of go from there. And then I would also prep the site by removing any grass or any plants or seed, like weeds or anything that are there, so that your site is just ready to go for you. And then I would also add a garden edge where possible. And this is something you can use bricks, you can use logs, just something to stop the grass from creeping back in, especially if you do an in-bed, like a farm bed garden, which we'll talk about in a second. The grass does always try to creep in. And so adding some sort of edge just stops that grass from creeping in, which is very nice. Perfect. So the first type of garden that we're going to talk about here is a farm bed. And this is just any garden that's just directly on that dugout space on your lawn. And it's not building anything on top of that to plant it in. And so for these, again, I would just start by removing that sod, getting that layer of just dirt, which is your starting point, and then digging down about 12 inches into the ground to just disturb the soil a bit to loosen it up, and then mixing compost on top of that. That's just gonna give you a really good base to start with. Really, like the undergrass, that first 8 inches is usually really good topsoil and really like nutrient dense soil anyways. So just mixing in that compost and kind of giving your plants a really nice foundation to start in, and having it a little loose for the roots to grow into is very beneficial for them. And these in-ground farm beds are, it's what I've done at my house because it's the easiest method to starting a garden. I didn't want to have to build myself a raised bed. So I went with just a farm bed because it is the easiest. And then it also means that the plants have access to groundwater. It's easily accessible for them. So if there's a drought, or if there's, a week where you go on vacation, whatever it is, they have that chance to still dig down deep and look for water on their own, which I think is a nice benefit to the in-ground beds. But there's also nutrients, again, from the soil that's all around them. So as I said, that first 8 to 10 inches is really good topsoil. And then all the nutrients from around, even under the grass beside it, whatever it is, really helps out the garden quite a bit. And our next type of garden here is our raised beds. And now I do love these beds as well because I do find them just so pretty. So maybe one day I will have these, but these are what we have in the community garden. And so I do like them as well, and they have their own benefits. And so this is something that I would say is kind of like a next step to like once you started an in-bed garden and once you've like decided that the location is good and is perfect, this is more of a permanent option because you're kind of really building this into the ground and staking it down. So yeah, but it is a really great option. And having that raised bed with the soil in it, one, you get full control over what type of soil that there is in it, which I really like that. You can kind of put in your own mix and build it up. It's usually 1 foot to 2 feet tall. Unless you're building an accessible bed, in which case you can make it as tall as you want. But they also, one of the benefits of raised beds is that they have less weeds creeping into your garden. And don't get me wrong, they're still gonna have weeds because that's just inevitable. But they are gonna have less weeds overall, which is very nice. And they also provide really great drainage from your soil because they are raised up. There's kind of space below for the water to go, and it gives really good drainage. And then they also stop soil from washing away. This is something that you might notice in a farm bed, that sometimes your soil will just kind of go away with the rain or like it'll start to pool on one side. And a raised bed is a really great option because it really has that wood barrier to stop your soil from leaving, which is nice. And at the bottom here, again, I put in a really great resource on how to build raised beds, where to put them, what materials to use, and then even what soil to use as well. So I linked it there, and we're happy to share this presentation with you afterwards so that you can use all these links as well to read a little bit more. And then I just added a page here about just general plant care and seed care because like maybe you wanted to just go buy a bunch of plants and then plant them in your garden, which is such a like easy and great option. So if you wanted to do that and you want to just stick them in the ground and get to gardening as soon as possible, then these are a few tips for you. Actually, these also work for if you grow your own, but it's for plants in general. But it's just to never let the soil dry out for those first 2 to 3 weeks once you have kind of a more mature plant. You want to make sure that you're giving them the water that they need because, no matter what plant you have, it's kind of new to the outdoor world. It's maybe only been out for like a couple weeks before you planted it kind of thing. So you want to make sure that they're getting the water that they need. They have shallow root systems to start. And so you want to make sure that you're keeping the top of the soil really wet. And then once you've had that mature plant in the ground, you're watering it every day for 2 to 3 weeks, then you can start weaning it off of water every day. And doing that, watering every other day and then every 3 days, whatever it is, you start to see like, okay, it'll start to droop and then I can water it again. Or like even if some leaves start to crisp or whatever it is, like you can kind of start to see when it needs more water. But the importance of weaning them off, especially if you have an in-bed or in-ground farm bed, is that you're forcing their roots to dig down deeper into the ground to look for groundwater. And this just makes for healthier and stronger plants. And then you're gonna get more yield and better, healthier vegetables from it. And one tip that I have here for choosing what to grow, and this is one that I learned the hard way, is to just choose what you're actually going to eat. Because again, you start gardening and you're just so excited about gardening and at the prospect of having your own vegetables that there might be just that disconnect of like, oh, I actually don't like whatever it is that I grew, which happened to me. So I thought I would just throw this in here because it's a little bit of a lesson. And you want to make sure that you're not, wasting the food that you grew. So think about what vegetables you actually like and then choose that to plant. And then another thing that you can think about when choosing what to plant is to think about what does well in your soil. So maybe in your second year, you remember last year, like carrots did so well in your soil. I would give more room to carrots and let them kind of be one of the main crops that you grow. And then another thing to think about is just planting veggies to save money. And this is, again, it's going to save you money no matter what. But if you do have limited space, this is something that I like to keep my mind on, is just planting the expensive vegetables. So if, you know, tomatoes cost however much at my store, and I eat a lot of tomatoes, then it makes sense for me to eat or to grow tomatoes, because it's a lot cheaper for me to grow however many tomatoes, or even peppers. Peppers is a really great example because they are pretty expensive. So yeah, just thinking about, you know, what you buy at the grocery store, how much it is, and what might be worth it, so that you can kind of get the most out of your garden, even financially. Perfect. So I wanted to just highlight a couple easy plants to grow. And so for this, it's not to say that you can't take care of them, or like you can plant them and then just forget them. They are just plants that will handle quite a bit of neglect. So they're really good for a beginner gardener. And so this includes things like tomatoes, beets, carrots, beans, lettuce, kale, and then most herbs as well will take quite a bit of neglect, or quite a bit of even like not enough sun, that kind of thing. So that's a really great option. And then I also just wanted to go over two different types of gardens that are really good, like beginner gardening lessons to kind of work with and work from. A really easy one is a salsa garden. And why I like this one is because it gives you something to do with the veggies once they actually grow. And so I've added a picture here off to the side, which shows you the north side and the south side, and then where to put the veggies. And I've also listed it out as well here, but the idea is that you're putting the taller plants at the back, or like towards the north side, and then they're not shading all the other vegetables. So at the front here, you're gonna put, it says cilantro for a salsa, but you can put whatever you would put in a salsa in terms of herbs. But cilantro at the front, onions and garlic in between, and then the peppers right there. And then the tomatoes are at the very, very back. And the tomatoes are the tallest one, so they're not gonna shade out all of your other vegetables here. And so this kind of just gives you a little bit of a highlight of how you might plant that garden. And then a perennial herb garden. So this is another really easy one to start with as well. And it needs that 6+ hours of sun. Herbs do really well. If you don't give them enough sun, they will handle it pretty well. But why I like this one is because it's perennial. So that means that it'll come back every single year. So I listed out the perennial ones for the Hamilton area. And so this is oregano, sage, thyme, chives, and then I've also listed here mint, but I've noted to be careful with this one because it does grow like a weed. So I never suggest planting mint in the ground. I always suggest planting it in a pot above ground. And so even in this picture, you can see some are in the ground, and then they've put things off in pots off to the side. Perfect. So now we can kind of get into, now that we've covered, I guess, the different types of backyard gardening, I wanted to also talk about balcony gardening, because this is especially in Hamilton, in a city, this is going to be your most common garden that you're going to see. So when growing on a balcony or on a deck, whichever it is, there are just a ton of options for you. But before starting, same with when you have your backyard, you want to make sure you're kind of monitoring and figuring things out before you actually plant your garden. And so for your balcony, I would always start with just checking your building's rules. This is something that, you know, there might be rules that your landlord might have that are going to affect how you grow things. And so I would always ask first and see what the rules are around balcony gardens. And then I would also, same thing, watch the space for a week or two just to see what kind of sun that it gets. So if it's east, south, west, or north facing. And then if it is north facing, if you don't get quite a bit of sun, then you might just want to stick to things that get that less, or that can handle less sun. So whether it be like lettuces, leafy greens, even I guess your herbs are a really, really good one for not getting a lot of sun. So yeah. And then I would also just measure your space to see what fits, so that you're not lugging things up there that you're going to have to lug back down. And then also utilize your vertical space. And so if you want to put in a shelf or something so that you can put more pots on it, and just get creative with your space, making sure that you're using as much as you can. So when talking about balcony gardening, it is important to talk about our containers. So this is something that you're absolutely going to need if you're going to do a balcony garden. And so there's some things to consider when picking out what types of containers. And it's just, you know, how deep are your roots going to need to go? How wide does it need to be? Does your container have good drainage? If it doesn't have good drainage, you're going to want to drill holes into the bottom of it because it's going to need good drainage. And then are you allowed rail planters? And this is one I would totally ask your building or your landlord, because you don't want to raise any red flags while you're growing your garden. Inches to 12 inch, or 10 inches wide and then 12 inches deep, to just accommodate a healthy root system. And so larger plants like your tomatoes are going to need at least that 5 to 10 gallon pot, which is 18 to 24 inches wide. But the larger is better because it's going to give it more room to grow. And then larger pots are also best for things like squash or even pepper plants as well. And then medium pots are suitable for things like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, eggplants, and small peppers. That being said, you know, there's always rules to gardening and there's always rules to, you know, how you grow things. But I would experiment, because I feel like every time there's a garden rule, it can always be proved wrong. And it's totally just about figuring out what works for you, what works in your space. So I would always just go for it and then just see what happens. And then rail garden boxes. I like this one. I have a couple out on my back deck because I think they're really pretty, and they're a really cool use of space, but they are like shallow. So you need to make sure that you're picking things that have shallow roots if you're going to do those rail gardens. And so I've listed here some plants that have shallow roots are things like strawberries, herbs, leafy greens, kale, and radish. But again, this is something that would totally get flagged by somebody in your building, so make sure that it is allowed beforehand. And then also when picking the soil here, it's the exact same as when you're starting your seeds. They need something light and fluffy. And so potting soil is what you're going to need to buy for your container gardens. And this helps with, one, it doesn't compact that soil, so it allows those roots to grow. It holds more water because container gardening does dry out quite a bit, so you need to be careful with that. And then it also helps with the weight of containers. If you've ever put just regular ground soil into a container, you might know it gets really heavy really fast. So when you do potting soil, it makes it so that it is movable, so that it is, you know, not super heavy, which is nice. And then with container gardens, you also need to make sure that you're keeping an eye on the water, because it is in a container. It doesn't have groundwater to access. So you need to make sure that it isn't drying up, and it's something that you need to check on daily. And so I always just stick my finger in a pot. If it's down 1 inch and if it's dry underneath that, I always water it, just to make sure that it gets that good water. And then the type of pots can also affect that too. Terracotta dries out a lot faster than plastic and metal. And so I typically go with plastic or metal, but I also, it's whatever, whatever you have on hand is whatever you can use. And then you can just kind of work out your watering schedules from there. But yeah, so it's something that it's just important to remember to just go for it. You know, I think that gardening is one of those things that there's so much information out there and there's so many different rules and whatever it is, but it's always worth it to just go for it, to experiment, to see how things work, and then to adjust and to figure things out from there. And it's also important to remember that it doesn't have to be Pinterest worthy, so it doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to be functional, and it just has to make you feel good. Those are the rules. So it's one of those things that, yeah, plants, I wrote here, plants might surprise you with, you know, where they're willing to grow. And so it's always one of those things that I would say, just go for it. And then at the end here, I just added some resources so that if you want to learn a little bit more about each thing that we've kind of talked about today, you can go in and see those. And so you can learn more after this presentation. So yeah, and then I've also just added here as well, our community garden is closed at Mohawk this year, just due to COVID. But if you'd like to email me, my email is linked here as well to be put on the 2022 list. But I've also linked to join a community garden near you, because there are hundreds of community gardens in Hamilton, and there's always somewhere that you could totally join up if you wanted to. And I think Lynn can take it over now for our Q&A. Hopefully we can answer a couple of questions that you guys have.
All right, thank you so much, Ashley. That was fantastic, and so much great information shared and practical tips that I personally can't wait to try, so thank you. So as she said, we'll turn it over to questions. We received a few in advance and a couple in the chat box today, so a big thank you to everyone who submitted their questions. If we are not able to get to your question, don't worry, you will receive a response by email. So the first question for you, Ashley, I can never get my cauliflower or broccoli to come to a decent sized head. What could I be doing wrong?
Yeah, so I will say cauliflower and broccoli are what I would consider more of like a harder vegetable to grow. And that's solely based on the fact that they need a lot more resources to be able to grow well. And so when cauliflower and broccoli, they both do it, they kind of go to these little like shoots instead of all one big form of a head. And that has to do with a couple different things. It could either be, you know, not enough light, not enough water. They don't like it when it gets too cold. They don't like it when it gets too hot. There's so many things. And so what I would personally do if I was trying to get just one head from it is to just maybe mulch around the bottom of it to make sure that water is being retained in it. Make sure you're watering well, make sure that it's getting more than 6 hours of sun a day. And then as well, I guess if it gets too cold, there's like a certain range. I don't remember what the temperature range is, but if it gets too cold, I would put a row cover over top of it or some sort of plastic to keep it warm at night. And then if it gets too hot, I would give it some sort of shade. And I think that's why they're the most expensive vegetables at the grocery store, is because they need so much babying.
A little bit more of a high maintenance plant, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Great, thank you so much.
Of course.
So another question we had, which I don't believe we've touched on yet, what are the best ways to naturally deter insects and pests? Great question.
Oh yeah, that is a great question. So there are so many pests and so many insects that come into the garden. And there are a ton of different ways to get rid of them as well. But if you're trying to go natural, there's always, you know, those little recipes that you can spray on them for sprays. And it usually consists of like warm water, dish soap, and baking soda is usually the kind of things, or there might even be some essential oils in there as well. But each bug kind of has its own recipe as well. But that's definitely something that I would do, is looking at what sprays you might be able to spray. I know neem oil is something that gets tossed around a lot, but I believe it's actually not, it's considered a pesticide in Hamilton, in Canada. And so it's something that is technically not allowed. So there's that to keep in mind. But I would also introduce certain plants into your garden as well, because there's you know, companion plants that you can plant beside things to be able to deter certain pests. And so marigold is a really good one that you can kind of plant even as a border around your garden to stop certain bugs from coming in, and even rabbits don't like it. But yeah, so I would say, you know, using those vinegar baking soda sprays, and then also planting companion plants beside it.
Great. Thank you so much. That was actually one of the questions that came into the chat
Oh, perfect.
about what herbs or vegetables could assist in keeping bugs away. So thank you. It's
Oh,
great.
yeah.
So another question we had come in. Do you have any tips for harvesting your own veggie plant seeds?
Oh, yeah, that's such a good one. So I always, yeah, okay. So I guess there's a couple different like methods, but usually what you need to do is keep one or two vegetables, like whatever you're growing. If it's a cucumber, I would just like mark it down and be like, we're not picking this one. If it's a tomato, same thing. I would just say we're not picking this one. And then at the end of the season, it's usually around September, October, you harvest that vegetable that you've been keeping for that purpose. And then you quite literally just dig out the seeds. A lot of times you can use like a sieve to try to get like the mushiness of the vegetables out. But once you actually have a hold of the seeds, you need to make sure that they're clean. So I always wash them underwater. I keep them in like it's called a sieve, but it's essentially like a little strainer. And just making sure that you're getting all of the vegetable residue off, because that can and will mold. So once you get all the vegetable residue off, then just dry them out and make sure that they're dry. And I just put them on paper towel in a windowsill. And then they can be stored in a like a paper bag over the winter, and then they'll be good to go.
Great, thank you. Another question, we have so many good questions coming in.
Yeah.
Another question we had received, what about veggie root space? So you touched on this a little bit. I planted veggies in pots from seeds last year, and I was thinking my roots did not have enough room to grow.
Yeah, so that's exactly, that is typically the case with container gardening, is just making sure that the plant is, I usually find that it has more to do with the depth than it does the width. And of course, like the plants will want to spread, but I find the depth is the really important one. So I always try to go 12 inches or more, unless there was a slide there where I talked about the shallow roots. And so that's things like your strawberries and your herbs. And your lettuces, those will be fine with a shallow pot, but anything else, I typically try to go 12 inches or higher.
Great. That's a good kind of standard tip. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think we have time for maybe one more question. And I think it's a good one to leave off on. What kind of things do you get to do when volunteering in the Mohawk Community Garden?
Oh, cool. Yeah. So typically, yeah, we do take volunteers on regular years. I don't think this year is going to be a regular year, but I think 2022 will be. But typically what we do is we'll have days where we come in and then we kind of have a goal for the day. And so at first it's usually like we're going to be planting things or planting seeds. And so then we'll do it's almost like a workshop each time, because I like to just explain, how we would plant something and what the steps are to be able to, even like with seeds, what the steps are. And then that's kind of at the beginning of the season. And then if you volunteer a couple times a week or weekly, whatever it is, you'll come in and we'll water together. We'll talk about watering practices, and then we'll talk about even pruning, trellising, harvesting. Pretty much every step of the way with gardening is something that we talk about, just so that, one, you're getting that experience, because that's the main goal with volunteering, is you should be getting something that you're learning from. But then also it helps because there's a lot of work in the garden, and so I do need help. And so I like to teach so that you're able to do it. Yeah.
Sounds like a great opportunity. So this would take place hopefully next year. So
yes,
these volunteer opportunities.
Yeah, I don't think that we're going to be able to take volunteers. If we do, it would be fall, because it kind of depends on Mohawk's rules. But you're always welcome to email me. My email was there listed at ashley.packer@mohawkcollege.ca to just even get on a volunteer list, and then I'll just email you when opportunities arise.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ashley.
Of course.
All right. So as we near the end of the hour, we do need to start to wrap up. So if we didn't get to your question, as I mentioned before, you will receive a written response by email. And I want to thank you again, Ashley, for your presentation today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to share your expertise. There's such a wealth of knowledge in this area. So again, very much appreciated.
Of course, thank
and
you.
I know, oh yeah, and I know I personally learned a lot, so I'm excited to spend some time working on my balcony garden. So and as we wrap up, I just want to mention other virtual events available to Mohawk graduates and students. On April 15th, which is next Thursday, Mohawk Alumni is hosting an 80s themed trivia night, and there will be a alumni prize pack up for grabs. And every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday throughout the week, you can participate in yoga and meditation classes. So those are available for students and graduates. So to sign up for these events, please visit the website mohawkcollege.ca/alumni events. And again, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us today and for staying connected with Mohawk. I hope you enjoy the rest of your sunny Wednesday. And thank you again for tuning in.